What's up, FSU fans? Thanks for tuning in today. So as I watched Indiana win a national championship, I was pretty happy for them. Obviously, there were a lot of reasons for FSU fans to be happy, mainly that they denied your biggest conference rival from winning a title. But for me, it was bittersweet because Indiana's national championship run just stripped away every excuse that Florida State has been hiding behind for the last 3 months. Watching the Hoosiers lift that trophy wasn't just about seeing a fresh team at the top. It was a direct mirror reflecting the failures of our own administration. Sure, we can celebrate that our biggest rivals didn't win the title. We can take solace in the fact that the trophy isn't in Gainesville or Miami. But that fleeting moment of joy is masking a much darker reality for the Seminoles. While we were busy laughing at rivals, Indiana was proving just how bad the FSU leadership is. And more importantly, they proved that FSU's decision to retain Mike Norvell was a catastrophic miscalculation. Now, you might think this is just about a coaching change. But when you look at the numbers, the coaching style, and the administrative failures, you realize that this goes a lot deeper. We have to talk about what Indiana's success actually exposes about the decision makers in Tallahassee. The first and most glaring lesson from Indiana is the financial reality of hiring a winner. There is a myth in Tallahassee that hiring a championship caliber coach requires a bank-breaking contract. We have convinced ourselves that unless we are spending $10 million a year, we aren't serious. But look at the receipt for what Indiana just pulled off. Indiana hired Curt Cignetti for $4.5 million annually. He wasn't a celebrity hire. He wasn't a retread from the NFL or a failed SEC coach looking for a golden parachute. He came from James Madison University with a hunger to win and a system that works. He costs less than half of what the top-tier coaches demand, and he delivered a national title. This fact alone shatters the primary defense for keeping Mike Norvell. The narrative has been that FSU couldn't afford to fire Mike Norvell because the buyout was too high and a replacement would be too expensive. And we wanted Lane Kiffin, but we couldn't get him. But that logic falls apart when you actually look at the numbers. If Florida State had pulled the trigger and fired Mike Norvell this year, yes, we would have triggered a buyout. We would have had to pay him over time. But nobody's talking about the money we would have actually saved on the back end. We have a contract that pays Norvell over $10 million in 2026. By firing him now, we would have saved 20% of that total. That means we would have saved just over $2 million by firing him. Think about that number for just a second. The $2 million we would have saved is almost half of what Indiana paid to get their national championship coach. The savings alone could have funded a massive portion of the next guy's salary. We are paralyzed by the fear of spending money, yet we're actively wasting money on a product that is proven not to work. The idea that FSU has to bring in a massive name and get tied into a $100 million buyout is pure nonsense. It's a lie that we tell ourselves to justify inaction. But the administration's failure isn't just about the money that they're wasting, it's about the opportunity that they're refusing to take. FSU fans were not demanding a celebrity. We weren't demanding a proven commodity. We were demanding a chance. We would have been happy with anyone who brought fresh blood and a new perspective. The administration acted as if the only alternative to Norvell was a guaranteed failure. But the reality of college football is that you don't need to get the hire perfect on day one. It doesn't matter if you don't get the next Saban immediately. It doesn't matter if you only paid $2 million a year for your next coach and made the contract heavy with incentive based on winning. What matters is that we are taking a swing at the plate. There is another Curt Cignetti out there. There is a coach at a smaller school or a coordinator with a vision who is ready to step up. And someone is going to find him. Every single year, one or two new coaches emerge from the shadows and absolutely dominate the landscape. They do it with less talent and less money than FSU has on its worst day. But you can't find that coach if you refuse to look. What we should never do is settle on someone who has already proven to be incapable of delivering FSU standards. And that is exactly what we've done. We've settled. FSU's leadership, including Mike Alford, Peter Collins, and Richard McCullough, have made a massive miscalculation here. The FSU standard is far more broken by keeping a known failure as opposed to hiring a less known coach for $2 million annually. You don't have to get every hire perfect. It is perfectly fine if you are hiring someone again in a few years because that first guy didn't work out. You try your best, you evaluate the results, and you see what happens. Look at our rivals to the south. The University of Florida has fired 5 coaches since Urban Meyer left. Miami had to hire 5 coaches before they finally landed on Mario Cristobal and got their program back to relevance. Did the misses hurt them? Temporarily, yes, but they kept swinging until they connected. We know we're in a bad financial situation. We know the ACC payout is a disaster. But you can live within your means and still hire a good coach and take a swing. You don't need $100 million to find a winner. You need eyes for talent. And what kills me is knowing we could have fired Mike Norvell, saved that 20%, and found a coach who would have been happy to take $2 million a year. We could have had a new coach without paying a penny more than we're currently committed to. That missed opportunity is going to haunt our program for a long time. But let's assume for a second that the money didn't matter, and that we kept Norvell strictly for football reasons. That argument collapses the moment you take a look at the disparity in preparation between FSU and Indiana. The second thing that came to mind watching Indiana was just how poorly FSU is coached by comparison. Reports coming out of Indiana's camp were shocking to old school football minds. They say that Indiana doesn't spend a massive amount of practice time in pads. They say that they practice only a few hours a week on the physical field. Instead, they spend significantly more time in the film room, mastering the mental side of the game. They work a whole lot smarter and not harder. They're preserving their bodies while expanding their football IQ. Now, look at what we hear from Tallahassee. We hear about the grind. We hear about the climb. I don't know the specific metrics, but if I'm Mike Norvell, I'm trying to figure out what the heck Indiana understands that I don't, because we look slow, tired, and mentally unprepared for large portions of our season. Indiana looked fast, fresh, and one step ahead of every play. If your process is grinding your players into the dust while the national champions are resting and watching film, then your process is wrong. Norvell prides himself on the work ethic of the program, but work without efficiency is wasted energy. We are racing in a marathon in combat boots while Indiana is sprinting in track shoes. The game has certainly evolved, and it seems like our coaching philosophy needs to as well. And until Norvell adapts to that reality, we are going to keep seeing a team that looks sluggish and outcoached. And even if Norvell changes his practice habits, there is a structural ceiling hanging over this program that no coach can fix. The third thing that came to mind was that FSU has no choice but to have a reckoning with their AD, Michael Alford, about the NIL cap. We are currently operating in a fantasy land regarding the salary cap for players. As everyone predicted, no serious programs are following the proposed revenue sharing caps. The House settlement was supposed to bring order to the chaos, but instead, it just created a black market that we were refusing to participate in. Teams are spending $10 to $20 million over the cap without blinking. And this stupid CSC isn't preventing it because they know they can't. What we have seen is basically a loophole system where you just have to word your contracts correctly. If you structure the deal as a third-party marketing agreement, you can spend as much as you want. And if anyone seriously tries to enforce limiting third-party NIL, they're going to get their butts handed to them in court. The antitrust laws in this country are very clear. You cannot tell a private individual how much money they can make from a third party. You already have multiple teams like Miami and Notre Dame calling to end the NIL caps altogether. They see the writing on the wall. They know that any cap is an artificial barrier that punishes the honest and rewards the aggressive. FSU has to find an AD who is living in this reality. And I want to be clear here. I like Michael Alford. I've done shows with him. I consider him a good person, a friend, but I'm much more loyal to the FSU standard than I am any employee at Florida State. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, even when it's uncomfortable. And unless he was to come out and admit that he is changing his thoughts on the conservative approach, we're in serious trouble. He needs to be ready to take the gloves off and play by the rules of the realm that everyone else is playing by. If the rest of this country is spending $30 or $40 million on a roster and we are capping ourselves at around 20 because of a rule that nobody enforces, we are choosing to lose. We're bringing a knife to a gunfight. The landscape of college football is ruthless. It doesn't care about your moral high ground or your adherence to a settlement that is legally toothless. It cares about talent acquisition. If our leadership cannot adapt, then they simply cannot be the ones to lead this program anymore. They have to go. Not because anybody is bad at their job in a traditional sense, but because the job has changed and others have not changed with it. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a pretty clear picture of what is broken. We have a coaching staff that is overpaid and inefficient in their preparation. We have an administration that is too scared to fire a coach despite having more options than they want to admit to. And we have an athletic director who is trying to follow rules that his competitors are using as toilet paper. Indiana didn't just win a trophy. They held up a light to our incompetence. They showed us that you can hire a winner for cheap. They showed us that you can practice smart and win big. And they showed us that the old excuses about money and resources are just that, excuses. Florida State is at a crossroads. We can continue to pretend that we are just one good practice away from turning it around. We can continue to pretend that the NIL cap is going to save us from having to spend big, or we can wake up. The path forward isn't complicated, but it requires courage that our leadership currently lacks. We need to stop fearing the buyout and start fearing irrelevance. We need to stop prioritizing hard work over smart work. And we need to stop playing by rules that don't exist. The blueprint is there. Indiana followed it. The question is, will we? If we don't start making these hard decisions now, we aren't just going to miss the playoffs next year. We're going to wake up in 5 years wondering how many more programs like Indiana became the model that we are desperately trying to copy. It's time to stop settling, and it's time to take our swings.